strung himself up in a French hotel room. I'm not shedding any tears for that left-wing douchebag, but stateside, we do have a serious problem with this suicide thing. According to the CDC, suicide rates have increased by more than 30% since 1999 in half of all U.S. states. Suicide rates rose in 49 out of 50 states from 1999 through 2016. More than half of suicides in 2015 in a subgroup of 27 states were among people with no known mental health condition, but then again, these people think it's a mental health condition to get upset over a divorce, while transgenderism is just an alternative expression of gender identity, so maybe we take that one with a piece of deer bait. And don't go getting your hopes up thinking it's just worthless people doing the right thing either. While non-whites, younger people, and people in other countries are seeing falling death rates, a 2015 study showed the reverse is happening for white men and women aged 45 to 54 in the United States. No boomer jokes. This is serious, folks. In 2016, nearly 45,000 Americans 10 and older died by suicide. The increases were particularly stark in the Intermountain West, including Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, Utah, North and South Dakota, Kansas, Minnesota, and Oklahoma. Between 1999 and 2016, suicide rates in these states, along with Vermont, New Hampshire, and South Carolina, rose 38% to 58%. More than a decade of steadily rising rates have made suicide the nation's 10th leading cause of death and one of the only 3 causes of death, including Alzheimer's and disease and drug overdoses, that are increasing in the United States. Covering the period from 1999 to 2013, a study by Princeton University researchers says it is particularly acute for those without a college education. A study on suicide trends in 27 states found that many victims acted after relationship problems or loss, substance misuse, physical health problems, or job, money, legal, or housing stress. And what does the CDC suggest that we do about this suicide crisis? Reduce a high-risk person's access to lethal items such as medications and firearms. Right, because gun control has worked so well for preventing homicides, right? Surely no suicidal person would dare break the law. Here's my take, folks. There are 2 things in this world that cause people to commit suicide. Mental illness and hopelessness. Either your brain doesn't work and you look around the world and you think there's no hope, or you take an honest assessment of the world and you conclude so correctly. And with things the way they are today, I'm not surprised that a lot of otherwise healthy people are concluding that all is lost. Now, the fact of the matter is, there is hope. You're listening to Hope right now, sick as that may sound. The problems we Americans face have solutions, but those problems do not want to be talked about, and so the Jews have called this thought crime racism. White men contemplate the future in a rather unique fashion that other races just do not quite grasp. This is the reason Jews and Democrats hate us, our men in particular. We are the creators of brighter futures, and when we are diminished, everybody loses. But when we are free to build those brighter futures, we create inequality, and the left would rather see everybody lose than to have to cope with their jealousies for a solitary moment. The crisis that we face is those same white men who feel so hopeless that they are killing themselves in increasing numbers, thus creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. And indeed, the future is quite grim. To so much as name the problem will have you smeared in the newspapers, bankrupted, assaulted in the streets, sued for nonsense, and framed for crimes. Should you seek to solve the problem, you will more than likely end up like George Lincoln Rockwell or Adolf Hitler. But is that not better than dying by your own hand, painting the wall with your brains, bleeding out in the tub, or fading away with his stomach full of Jewish pills? That is why they do not want us to be heard. If white men get a sense of identity, know what the problem is, and see a path to solving it, while they are so fed up with the status quo that they're ready to die, that's how race wars start. The suicide epidemic among white men is a healthy instinct turned against us like so many others. We need men who are prepared to lay down their lives to solve this problem, thousands of them, but they need to see an alternative to this inglorious anticlimactic end. 740-IM-1488, a Radical Agenda on Skype. And I'll tell you something kind of personal on this note. I've sort of shied away from getting into my own life on a show in Stage 3 because I've come to regret some of the things I've shared in the past, frankly. But it does add sort of an important dimension to what it is that we're doing here. And I have definitely felt that hopelessness that I've just described here, folks. Even back when I was a kid, I was just never satisfied with any of the answers I got from my parents, my teachers, or even religious leaders. Everything always seemed so pointless and just so. Everything was gray area and compromised, and you'll understand when you get older, and because I said so. I was never able to get an explanation for anything, and on the rare occasion somebody endeavored to try and explain something, the slightest bit of inquiry into the explanation was shot full of holes, and my inquiry quickly dismissed. I concluded that everybody was full of shit by the time I was like 7 years old. I had no respect for authority. I became convinced that morality was a scam, and I don't remember exactly when it was that I discovered the word nihilism, but I was probably a nihilist before I hit puberty. And I had a rough fucking life as a result, let me tell you. Don't smoke pot. Why? Because it's illegal. Why do they get to tell me what to do? Because they're in charge. Don't steal. Why not? Because it's illegal. You still haven't given me a suitable explanation for the nature of illegality. Don't bang that whore. Why not? Because God said so. How do I ask him about this? Pray. I tried that. No answer. I'm getting a blowjob. And so I did drugs. I stole. I ran around with niggers and white people who acted like them. I thought I was smarter than everybody else, and of course I was, but not for the reasons I thought. I was getting into fights all the time, running from police, getting kicked out of school. For me, the point of life was the next thing that got my heart rate up, and what happened next didn't seem to matter much. Then I got locked up at 19, and I didn't come out until I was 20. That'll make you think about time differently, let me tell you. I didn't have any more answers than I did when I went in, but I knew I didn't want to go back to jail. And so I did what everybody else does. I went to work day in, day out, paid my bills, and accepted that this is all there was to life. I drank myself unconscious in the safety of my own home on the nights I couldn't cope with the pointlessness of it all, and eventually that became a nightly habit until 10 years later I spent my 30th birthday in the same goddamn jail for driving .01 over the legal limit while out on a date with an illegal immigrant that I met on Live Links. And I was pissed. I was not drunk. I literally had one more drink than Mothers Against Drunk Driving approved of. I was doing 15 miles an hour over the speed limit, and some cop who was just doing his job pulled me over not 20 feet after a speed limit change because he, too, had accepted that that's all there is to life. Day in, day out, do what you're told, get paid, spend it, repeat. Well, that was the end of Chris Cantwell as the world had known him until then. That's how I became a fanatic. I was one of these constitutional libertarian types, a Michael Badnarik devotee who thought once people understood what had happened to our constitutional republic, the revolution would be underway and I would be vindicated as a free man on the land with his right to travel intact. That brought me great meaning, a cause greater than myself that I could feel comfortable dying for if necessary. I had never felt anything like that before in my life. I loved it. I wanted to share it with everyone. I ran for Congress. I handed out literature. I went to protests. I evangelized online. I even started what might be described as the first incarnation of Radical Agenda, a blog talk radio show called Welcome to the Real World. But shortly after, the hopelessness came back. People were not waking up. Even the people who saw the problem weren't willing to do anything about it besides meet at a diner for a social gathering and talk about how bad things had gotten and how much worse they were going to get. I started prepping, which is an insane exercise when you live in a basement apartment in Long Island, and hopelessness quickly set in on that. Then I discovered the non-aggression principle, and I thought we were saved. This was so much easier to explain to people than the Constitution. Just don't hurt people or steal their stuff. No more explanations of that well-regulated militia thing necessary. This is something everybody can adhere to. And I moved to New Hampshire, and I hung out with anarchists and chased meter maids around and drank all the time, and nobody judged me because I wasn't hurting anybody, and anybody who did judge me, I just called them a statist and told them they were immoral. It got me nowhere, but I managed to convince myself the world had just gone crazy, and back came the hopelessness. I got fat. I drank every day. Dying was no longer something I was willing to do. It was something I was hoping for. I directed all my rage at police and wrote war propaganda against them, stirring people to violence as best I could and patiently waiting for the day that somebody would put me out of my fucking misery. Now, the downsides to this line of thinking are too obvious to need stating, but there is an upside. I got it in my head that I was already dead, and let me tell you, it's hard to intimidate dead men. Some people have described my handling of recent adversity as brave or courageous, and I humbly and reluctantly accept the compliment, but that is where this comes from. The difficulty, ironically enough, is that I ended up here specifically because I began to see hope around the same time I started shifting rightward ideologically. I was involved in a self-defense situation in Keene one night where I was compelled to draw my weapon on some drunk scumbags in the street. The cops showed up, and rather than gun me down, they cleared me of any wrongdoing, handed me my pistol, and sent me on my way. That night, all the bullshit I had through my head, I'd gone through in my head a million times, was pushed clear aside. I told myself so many times I was ready to kill and die, and while I had my .38 revolver pointed at that man's chest, I never wanted so badly not to kill someone as in that moment. When the cops showed up, I thought for sure they were going to kill me, and I never wanted to live so badly, and boy, was I glad they shut that situation down peacefully. Maybe there was something to this authority thing after all. And if you watch that crying Nazi video, the point where I got choked up was when I said I contacted a cop from my neighborhood asking him what to do. He was the one. He was the one who showed up. And it was like the gravity of all these changes that had happened over the last couple of years all hit me in that moment, right? But I felt that hopelessness again. I had come so far. I worked out. I got in shape. I went through 3 girlfriends, made a success of myself with the radical agenda, and prevailed in battle. I had been so careful. I wore a body camera. I said I wouldn't participate in it unless everything was legal and the cops were involved. But now the TV was telling everybody that I was part of a terrorist attack, and I was going to have to tell 12 registered voters who had watched that same coverage, and I was defending myself. And I hid out for a few days trying to hire a lawyer, and that started looking like that was going to be impossible. My access to money was severely restricted, and I started listening to those thousands of voicemails that were pouring in on my Google Voice, and a lot of them were telling me to kill myself, and I'd be lying if I said it didn't cross my mind to take their advice. I did not want to go back to jail, I tell you that. But I did. And in there, it's even more hopeless. Sitting in that hotel room with a trunk full of firearms, I at least had the option to end it all easily. Sitting in solitary for a month, you can't help but try to figure out how you would kill yourself if you wanted to, and it's not completely impossible, but there is no easy way, and if you've ever known somebody who fucked up a serious suicide attempt, you know that they are not to be envied. I remember when I bought my first legal handgun, that was one of the comforts it brought me. If I wanted to end it, I had the option to do so with certainty. Suddenly, it doesn't seem so bad to be short on money, right? When that's your pain threshold, suddenly it isn't such a big deal if people call you a racist or your website isn't the most popular, right? That girl you broke up with probably wasn't the most important thing in the world, and you will find another job. Maybe the problem with today's society is that people have just gotten too comfortable. Maybe they just haven't suffered enough. Well, our enemies will happily solve that problem. So if you listen to the sound of my voice and you feel like there's no hope, do not prove yourself right. When it's time for you to die, somebody else will gladly take care of that for you, and in the meantime, we have a lot of work to do. And tomorrow's another day, fellas. All right, welcome back to the Radical Agenda. Thanks for sticking with me through that unusually long break. I was particularly proud of that little rant there. If it choked you up, feel free to send me money. It'll make you feel better. 740-IM-1488, Radical Agenda on the Skype, Sam.